All right, Bible class folks, if you're out there in the parlor or just grabbing a coffee and thinking about making your way in, it is time to translate those thoughts into actions and begin to journey into the sanctuary here so that we can continue our discussions based on the book of Daniel, and in particular this week, our continuing conversation of the events in Daniel chapter 3 and the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So, ready to join us. Are the online folks with us as well this morning? Oh, there the lights are on. That way I know the online department is here, so we welcome you as well if you're just tuning in wherever you may be or joining us later through the wonders of YouTube. Just while people are making their way in, a quick note that you can get a copy of today's lesson notes if you're in the church on the table. These are the same notes we've been using for a couple of weeks now. We're not all the way through them yet. We may get there today. I don't know. Every time I say that, I end up we end up not getting there. But you never know. One of these days it will be a true prophecy. If you're online, of course, you can grab the lesson notes from the church website. Again, they're the same ones if you downloaded them previously that we've been using for a little bit here and continue to make our way through. And if you have questions and things you'd like to comment on during the class, obviously in here, just put your hand in the air and we'll do it the old-fashioned analog way. I'll see it and we'll answer. And I really will try a little bit harder this week. I promised this last week and then promptly forgot to check in on the online email questions that may come as well. All right, just to get ourselves all warmed up and thinking in the right direction here, a few things that I saw on the internet this week, and I really don't spend a lot of time looking for these. Sometimes they just happen. Spring is coming, and I don't know whether it's still the case or not, but our oldest daughter was in brownies and Girl Guides and those kind of things, and spring inevitably meant Girl Guide cookie sale time. And things have not gone quite as well, I guess, for the Girl Guides. So they've, well, you can read it yourself. It's one of those unfortunate things that happens on TV sometimes where the picture is one thing and the little ticker, I think that's what they call it at the bottom, is something completely different, but you bring the two of them together and that can be pretty fun. And if Girl Guides came to my door dressed like that to sell their cookies, I would buy. I'll buy them anyway. They don't have to nearly shoot me to get it done, but anyway. All right. And with spring around the corner, I was out in the backyard yesterday, not yesterday, Friday. It was a much nicer day, Friday. And, you start seeing all the little projects that need to be done, and you start prioritizing them. And one of the things that we did last year was build a little tool shed in the backyard. And one of the things that needs to be done this year is we need to run some electricity to it so we can turn on a light in there. And then I saw this. Yeah, that pretty much describes my ability with electricity right there. I'll be finding someone to do that. Don't do that. Okay, and if on a day like today you're wondering, and yesterday particularly, is it ever going to warm up? Here's a little bit of reassurance for you. The spring is right around the corner. This last one. The last little sign I'm going to show you is in Dutch. but you do not need to speak Dutch to be able to get the gist of it. I saw it yesterday, and I just split aside laughing. Here it is. Basically, the upshot of this is, don't make your coffee with the knackwurstwater. That would be like taking the water from those Vienna sausages that you can buy in the can and then dumping that into your coffee machine. That is, I don't speak Dutch, but I know enough German, that is verboten. No knackwurstwater into coffee. It reminded me of many years ago, I had a couple of vicars, one right after the other. And vicar number 2 was a very eager to please young man who was himself not a coffee drinker. But we began our week together on Tuesday mornings with a staff meeting, and everybody knew that I drank coffee, and that was, before the meeting started, the coffee maker was on, and we were good to go. Anyway, one Tuesday morning, he got there early, my vicar did, and he wanted to do something special for me. So he had picked up some kind of flavored coffee. I don't know, hazelnut cherry supreme or something like this that you can buy. And he made the coffee. And I came in and I said, oh, the coffee's made already. Big smile on my face, poured myself a cup of it, put in a little sugar, stirred it around, sat down at the table, and then nearly did like they do in the films, where you... I was like, what is this stuff? Went on a little tirade about not messing with the coffee first thing on Tuesday morning. This is not a time to mess with me. Oh, I thought you'd really like it. I said, I like the coffee we use. I said, don't do that ever again, or you're failing your vicarage. It could have been worse. It could have been knackwurstwater. Anyway. All right, let's talk about some hope in the midst of hostility. And the hostility is rising in Daniel chapter 3. We've talked about this a fair bit already and won't belabor the point too much, but just to catch everybody up. The central issue in Daniel chapter 3 is this statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has put up. It is a statue that when people hear the music and the instruments that play the music are laid out in great detail, and it's a long list. People are to bow down and worship the statue. And of course, pretty much everybody does this, with the exception of at least 3 of the Judeans, probably 4. I don't know that Daniel would have done it either, but he didn't get caught. The 3 that get caught are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who, like Daniel, came to Babylon in the very first wave of the deportations, had been trained in the Babylonian ways, and had risen to positions of authority. And a whistleblower somewhere in the Babylonian establishment rats them out to Nebuchadnezzar that they have not bowed down to the statue, and they are in trouble for doing that. The punishment for not bowing down to the statue is death, and not a particularly nice death by being thrown into the fiery furnace. This next slide is a joke. Somebody sent it to me, and they said, I think I know what the statue looked like. I made some point of this. We really don't know what the statue looked like. I'll go over this very fast. Want to see it again? There it is, yeah. Anyway. Any of folks who may be tuning in from the U.S., we just need a laugh once in a while. All right. And the issue, one of the issues, there are several, that this incident brings into focus is faith a private matter, a public matter, or both? And just to kind of set the context again, we don't read anywhere in the instructions that the king gives that the people of Judah are forbidden from worshiping their God in their own homes. There were many gods in the Babylonian religious system. They had gods for everything. And people had little idols in their homes of the gods that were special to them. They maybe even had a few personal gods and personal idols that they looked to for guidance along the way. And nowhere does that seem to be forbidden. The issue really seems to be what happens when you're out in public. The statue was placed in a very public place, and when you heard the music, you were to bow down toward the statue and worship. And this was really an attempt, because Babylon didn't just have Babylonians. It was a world city, and like any world city, there were people from all over the world who lived there, including the Judeans and people from various other ethnic and cultural backgrounds. And one of the goals that Nebuchadnezzar has throughout his reign is to assimilate these people, to make them one group. And he knows he can't outlaw what you do in your home and what you believe in your home, but in a sense, he's trying to get people to adhere to the public values of the world in which they find themselves, and they show that adherence to the values of the Babylonian culture by bowing down and worshiping. Well, what does that mean for you and me today? We talked about this quite a bit last time, and we'll talk about it. And then, but more than that, I want to go into how do we respond to that in our world today? When you do an online search or read something about what do Canadians, for example, particularly value, there are a lot of words that we have used for a very long time to describe the things that we value. The meaning of those words and how those words are understood in the public sphere has changed over time, as sometimes meanings of words do and what they're intended to show. But for example, we talk about democracy. We're led to believe that the Prime Minister is heading to the Governor General's place. He may already be over there having tea and discussing the date for an election. And it's our value that and something we hold to, that on April 28th or whatever day this ends up being, that we cast our votes, that the result of that vote will be respected. Everyone will have one vote. You can't do like the Rhino Party used to suggest, vote early and vote often. You vote once, and we as a country accept the outcome of that ballot, whether we happen to agree with how it went or it didn't. That's a value that we hold. We also hold to ideas of diversity and inclusion. This tends today to be very centered around issues of same-sex marriage, the whole LGBTQS plus spectrum of issues. And that has given it a very distinctive focus in the last few years. But historically, it's meant a lot more than that. It's meant people from different cultures, different backgrounds. And as someone pointed out to me in an email, an area that doesn't get a whole lot of airplay, certainly not as much as it should, is the inclusion of folks with physical disabilities, for example. That a person who has to live their life in a wheelchair sometimes experiences significant detriments to being able to live their lives the way the rest of us do. Equity and equality, slightly different interpretations on those words, but that we're equal and we're treated basically the same, which leads into fairness. And then, over the last many years now, I mean, I remember, when I was in about grade 5 or grade 6, being instructed about pollution and then, going through the 80s and the whole fuss over acid rain, and now, a much more aware sense of the environment, some, where it tends to go, maybe a little bit too far is when, someone will say that every decision every government ever makes all the time, forever and ever, amen, needs to be funneled through the what does this do to the environment kind of thing. We almost raise the environment to being like its own deity sometimes. That's, but it again, I mean, this is, we value that as a country. We put the pictures of the forests and the mountains and the pristine lakes and hills on all our postcards, and those are all things that we value. Like I say, it's kind of the public things that we hold dear as Canadians. Like I say, where the rub has come for many of us in the last few years is that, and we talked about this at great length last time, that how people understand these and the very specific interpretation people give to these is fluid and has changed from what you might describe, say 60, 70 years ago, where basically we understood these in a very Judeo-Christian mindset that the definitions we give are shaped in large measure by Scripture and our faith, as the Judeo-Christian mindset and has sort of ebbed away in society and been replaced by something else. We'll come to what something else is, I think, in a minute. You end up with a whole different, this becomes a much more challenging thing for Christian people, confessing conservative Christian people, to say, yeah, I'm in on those values and I'm not comfortable. I care about, I'll just use environment, for an example. Yeah, I care about the environment, but no, I don't, the trees are not here to be worshiped. It's not wrong to do something to mine the resources that God has given to us. The Bible talks about digging copper out of the hills. Well, you got to do some digging. You're going to cause some mess in the environment. We can't live without any footprint on this world, as much as some maybe want us to try to do that. And so, while we care about the environment, it's not all about worshiping the earth. It's not all about the sacredness of the land. It's about the sacredness of God and the stewardship of God's creation. And you could do that with just about all of these, kind of go and say, okay, I mean, as this used to be, yeah, I got it, I was with it. As it's changed, I'm not so sure. What's happened, of course, in the country and in North America and Europe particularly over the last 50, 60 years is that we have slid massively into a very secular kind of world where religion, where faith, whatever your particular faith may be, is something more for the home, for your private practice, and something much less welcomed in the public square. And we see examples of that left, right, and center. We brought some up last week. For example, military chaplains now more or less being instructed to not pray in Jesus' name. And other events where a prayer may be given, but it is so generic and so watered down that you don't really know to whom the prayer is being offered, why it's being offered, or what particularly is being asked for, because it all just kind of floats around in generalities. And in some cases, and maybe not, here in Canada certainly as well, there's a kind of a creed. Now this is, we talked about this book last week, The Secular Creed by Rebecca McLaughlin. I've had a little bit more time to engage with that book this week, and some of what we're going to talk about is based on that engagement. But she... this goes back a few years. I think the book was written in 21, so it's not old, but these things morph and change rather quickly. It came upon a sign that she saw quite often in her neighborhood, and the sign, the words of the sign, it's just a little lawn sign that people put out, basically gave the house's statement of faith. In this house we believe. Black lives matter, love is love, gay rights are civil rights, women's rights are human rights, transgender women are women. And I think rather astutely, she seized upon that as being a kind of, this is in its own way the creed by which a lot of public discourse is expected to happen with respect for these kinds of statements, that if you don't acknowledge this, then you're not really acknowledging the values that we are apparently to have today. And she seizes on this in kind of the similar way to Nebuchadnezzar, wanting that statue to be the thing, whatever that statue represented, to be the thing that everybody valued, everybody would bow down to, everyone would respect. And in a similar way, this is an example, it's maybe not the only one, maybe not even the best one, of what have become in many places the public values that we are as citizens of this country to adhere to. And that makes things very complicated for Christian people, particularly Christian people who are more conservative, more confessional, and who believe, no, the Bible actually teaches some things that are quite different from what is laid out here. And we confess that, and we want to live like that, and we don't want to live one life in the privacy of our home and then have to switch into somebody else when we go out into the world. And as I say, you are much more in on that struggle than I am. I have the luxury, and it is very much a luxury, of having a very close integration between what I believe in my home and what I believe here at work, because it's the same. You don't get that. Many of you, where you have to go into your workplace, and as part of your workplace, it means acknowledging statements like this, and at least, kind of saying, yeah, I guess so, even if you don't really honestly believe that. The great danger, and we ended up with this last time, that comes to the church and to Christians as we face this increasing pressure from the world to accept its ways. We see congregations, falling by, not worshiping, closing, all that sort of thing. Churches tend to, unhealthy things can happen to churches. They tend to become much more inward focused. It's just about us and just about our faith. We're going to put up some walls, not just the brick ones on the building, but we're going to just kind of insulate ourselves into the bubble here, and we'll just talk in our bubble about the things that we believe, and we'll just let the world be. We talked about that a little bit back a number of lessons ago, where we talked about the Benedict option, this idea that Christians basically just need to withdraw and just look after their own spiritual health and their own psychological health, and in a certain sense set aside the Great Commission because it's not a particularly popular thing in the world right now. That has some other consequences. Our faith becomes disconnected, and we become disconnected, rather, from our neighbors, the people right around us. I don't think my neighborhood is unusual in this, but back when I was growing up, and maybe when you were too, you knew everybody on your street. You knew them all. You knew their kids, you knew their problems, you knew everything. How many of you still live in a neighborhood where you can honestly say that about your neighbors? A couple of you, yeah. It's not really as common anymore. And I would say the same for me. I know 2 or 3 of my neighbors reasonably well. The rest, no. We are in such different spheres of existence that very rarely do our paths even cross, though we might live rather closely to each other. The other thing that tends to happen is even the church gets out of doing anything about anything. The church has, throughout its history, been one of the great drivers of social change in society. If it wasn't for the church, slavery would have continued much longer than it did. If it wasn't for the church, we wouldn't, churches were the place that hospitals came from and nursing homes came from and all kinds of things came from historically. But when we privatize our faith, we don't get out there and do what we can be doing. We can't solve all the world's problems, but we don't do what we can be doing to solve the problems. We just leave this to the government. They'll look after it somehow and let them have sway. And ultimately, taken to its ultimate conclusion, faith can become more of a kind of a leisure activity, even for us. As the creed of the world, the ways of the world, push our faith off to the side. Okay, I've babbled on here for a little bit, just sort of kind of recover where we were last week, because we had a lot of back and forth, and that was all really good. I love that. But just to kind of tie it all up and summarize it. Any comments, questions, observations? Kier? Yeah, I mean, it's a good word. I think you're right. We could have easily put that on the list of things that are kind of public values these days. Tolerance, yes, that we know people are different from us, and so we are tolerant of them. But I think you raise a good point. Tolerance tends to, put us all in silos, and I'll tolerate you and you'll tolerate me, and how we're going to do this is we're not going to have much to do with each other. And that then leads to other, issues. Yeah, exactly correct. Yeah, James.
So,
Right. We're going to come to that in just a few minutes. What you're talking about.
The other question I have is this list of everybody.
Yeah.
So when do the androids get full rights?
When do the androids get full rights? No, I know. Yeah, no. Yeah,
I mean, that's not going to happen.
well, I have no idea. I don't. James has extreme views. Yeah, no. I mean, it's interesting. I've only dabbled and literally very, very little at the edges of artificial intelligence and what's out there, and what I have found is, I mean, it's fascinating on one hand, and frightening on another. Was it last week or the week before? I was doing my research for my sermon, and quite often when I'm researching and going through the commentaries and things like this, I like to read what other people have done with the same text. And it used to be pretty simple. I would just enter the text, say I was preaching on this morning's gospel, Luke 13, 1-9, into the Google thing, and then hit sermon, or might even add Lutheran. So I get, our guys, what are we saying about this? Not that I use those sermons, but sometimes it's just helpful to read what somebody else said, and sometimes at least it makes you go, well, I'm not going to say that. It gives you a base to work from. Anyway, I hadn't done this for a little while, and I'd hit a bit of a writer's block in terms of my writing, and so I did it. And now Google has this AI feature, and boom, it laid out a whole sermon outline for me on the text. And I was like, holy cow. I just was like, well, I'm not using that. I don't like that. Anyway, I was thinking, and I got thinking to myself, wow, I hope it doesn't all come down to this in the next 25 years, that pastors are just inputting a text and for the next 2 years, inputting a text and cranking out whatever AI gives them and preaching it. The whole experience actually led me to write a quick email to the editor of the preaching magazine for the Missouri Synod. I'm on the editorial board of that, but believe me, if there was ever a do-nothing position, and it's that. I've been to one meeting in 12 years, and there's none on the horizon. Anyway, I'm on the editorial board. And my primary purpose is to feed him names of Canadian sermon writers, pastors who could write. Anyway, and to do some writing myself. So I banged off a quick email to him, and I said, it just occurred to me that maybe we can make some hay in an article about analog preaching. I gave myself as an example. You may know this, you may not know this about me. Every sermon I preach is handwritten, longhand with a fountain pen. And when I'm done, I have big ink blotches on my fingers because it's messy. And that's how my brain works. And I had read some other things about kind of the revenge of analog and the benefits of actually writing that way on your creative thinking, on your presentation and things like that. So I emailed this off. I said, we should get somebody to write an article about this because, in the face of all this, you can just do this now. We maybe need to say something. He says, good idea, write it. So I'm on to write an article sometime over the next several months about that very subject, because I think this is a grave, danger that people will unwittingly fall into. Anyway, did I see a hand there, Arnold, or were you just? Okay. Anyway. All right. Let's get into Daniel here. We've been talking about the world, but this is Bible study, not sociology class. And what is the response of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to the world in which they find themselves? If you have a Bible handy, you might want to dig it out. We're in Daniel chapter 3. We're going to read the 5 verses, 13 to 18. It's 8, 5, 8, 6, 7, 8. 8, 5, 8. There you go. It's the same number forwards and backwards. All right. They have been hauled on the carpet, and Nebuchadnezzar wants to have a little chat with these guys. Beginning at verse 13. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up?" Now, when you hear the sound, and we get this kind of repetition and this kind of, a little wink of Daniel, it almost makes you chuckle as you read this again. You hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre. We need a zither solo in church. We haven't had a good zither solo for a long time. The lyre, the harp, the pipes, and all other kinds of music. If you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." There you go. Public worship of the image, no way. If these are the values that we were expected to confess and the things that we're expected to do, we're not doing it at all. And it's an amazing confession. There's a lot in the couple sentences that they state before the king. We have no need to answer you in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us. They trust that the God of Israel, the God of Isaac, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the God who brought them out of Egypt, the God who's cared for them all these centuries, is able. He is all powerful, that he can and save them, that there is nothing that Nebuchadnezzar could do. They confess, if you will, the omnipotence, to use the big confirmation word, of God, his all-powerfulness. There's nothing Nebuchadnezzar could do that God is not able to deliver them from. Then they go a step further. And he will deliver us. They are absolutely 100% confident that should they end up in the furnace. That not only is God able to do something in the abstract sense of, yes, he can, he's all powerful, but that he will do something to save them. They're that certain in their faith that God will not abandon them. He will come and he will deliver us out of your hand. But then comes the most interesting part. But if not? But if not? They believe that God can, that God will, but that if God does not, that God is able to save, that God will save, but if it is not God's will to be saved, then they will be saved not from death, but through death. And that's an amazing confession. That is the confession of every martyr that has ever lost their life for the sake of the faith. And in many ways is to be our confession too. God is able to deliver us. We trust that he will deliver us. But that deliverance may not come in the way that we expect it to come. Now, we all know what happens to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They survive. We're going to come to that part of the story, not today, but probably next week. And they survive by the direct intervention of the Lord. But God was under no obligation to do that. They trust that he will deliver them either from the fire or through the fire. And because of that, because they have that eternal view in mind, they're able to say, we're not going to serve your gods or worship the image that you've set up. You can huck us in the fire. Go right ahead. Because one way or the other, we will be delivered. Tim, I see you're at the back.
I remember this from so far back, and I just realized something here, that there are two different things that they're talking about. First is deliver us from the fire. God is able, and he's making that statement, and we know what happened. But he will deliver us out of your hand, which is out of the king's hand. So no matter what happens with the furnace, they are delivered from the king's hand.
Yes.
That is the distinction between the two.
Yep.
And that either they're going to walk out unscathed or they're going to be in God's hands, but they will be out of the reach of the king's hand.
That's right. Exactly correct. Yeah. I didn't really emphasize that part of the sentence, but it could just as easily have been, as Tim did, that the real issue here is that he is delivering them out of the king's hand. The king thinks he has supreme authority. The king wants supreme authority, but he doesn't have it. And neither does the image nor any of the other Babylonian gods. They trust that he will deliver them. James.
Well, I think it happens in the same way today, is that I have a friend and she knows what I believe, she's an atheist, and for some reason I don't throw her out of my life.
Mm-hmm.
I just keep telling her what I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But I have somebody else that was removed from my life.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of works both ways. So I mean, with person. You're not supposed to give up.
No, no. Yeah, we're going to come to some of this stuff in just a minute about. Well, we're coming. I really seriously. It's on the next couple slides. Yeah, you're just ahead of me. You're just a brilliant mind. Brilliant mind. No, I mean, exactly correct. What you're saying is that we don't give up. And I mean, on people, even though they differ with us. And that's absolutely correct. And, like even these three, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are not giving up on the king. I mean, they're going to still continue to serve the king. They're not giving up on him. They're boldly confessing their faith to him. And the hope is, and our prayer is that God would give us in, the world we live in today, that same courage to confess our faith, but to do so in a way that is winsome. And I mean, that's what that's another thing that can be brought out here. Didn't emphasize it that much, but they don't tell Nebuchadnezzar here to go, jump in a lake. I had another word in my head, but it's not fit for church. But they don't tell him to, they're not rude to him. They're not disobedient, insolent to him. They don't talk down to him. They just state their faith and commend themselves into the king's hands. He has the power to do. They're not arguing, oh, you're violating my rights. You're violating my rights here. I have a right to believe what I want to believe. You're violating my rights. You're a stupid man. They don't do that. They just simply confess their faith. And they do it in a way that ultimately doesn't burn any bridges. To talk about, bring fire into the analogy here. And we'll see that at the end of the chapter. There's a restoration again between Nebuchadnezzar and these three because they haven't. They've done this in a way that is in its own way winsome. It's clear, but they're not picking fights with the man. Claude, I see you briefly.
That whole situation reminds me of when St. Peter was in front of the Sanhedrin and they were saying, stop preaching Christ. And it was more of a thing that St. Peter said he was more into proclaiming the true Christ, not the traditions of the Sanhedrin.
Yeah.
So he wasn't rude to them.
Nope.
Listen, guys, Christ is the real deal. That's where I'm going.
That's right.
I'm not going to deal with your traditions just because they've been in place for a long time.
Right, exactly correct. And you see the same approach in the New Testament. The New Testament church submitted to the authorities insofar as they were able to do it. When push came to shove and they were told they could not preach anymore, they said, well, I'm sorry, we have to disobey that because we are compelled to speak about the things that we have seen and heard. But they didn't do it in a way that, they got all in a huff and stomped out of the meeting mad and made a ton of enemies along the way. They did it in a very gentle, very forthright way, but that, again, didn't burn bridges behind them. And this is the call for us as well, to confess our faith in this world, but to do so in a way that is winsome and not alienating, and that ultimately shows our trust in God and what He is able, that He will bring us through one way or another as we go through these times. So let's slip this forward into our time. Again, I'll quote from McLaughlin here. because she sums it up pretty succinctly. I think this isn't on your lesson sheet. As I've said before, when we don't get through the sheet in 1 week, it becomes a little bit like a snowball. I take it home, I roll it around a few more times and add a little bit to it, and we get some other colored snow on there and stuff like that. So this isn't in your lesson sheet. But as I engaged with the book a little bit more this week, I came across this understanding of our world. She takes all this creed that I showed you before, and I think she puts her finger on things pretty well. For a growing proportion of people in the West, and by the West here she means Europe, North America primarily, not identifying with any particular, somehow I didn't get this right, the sentence isn't correct, but anyway, the upshot is most people don't identify with any particular religion. If I look around my neighborhood, for example, there are some Muslims, there are some practicing Christians, there are a couple of Sikh families, and down the street there's a Hindu family. But pretty much everybody else on the street, regardless of where they come from, as best I'm able to determine, doesn't really have any particular faith. Maybe they do, and I just don't know. But this is increasingly true amongst North Americans and Europeans, that we don't have any particular faith that we cling to, but we retain a lot of beliefs about human equality. And that has felt to many people like a safe place to land in today's world. And I really like her description because I think it is pretty spot on. Not a lot of people go to church anymore, particularly those of European background. People just don't. And yet, they retain, one of the core teachings of Christianity, and that is the equality of human beings. Now, there's a couple ways you can go about addressing that. I mean, you go back to that creed again. Basically, it was all about equality. Regardless of your race, we're equal. Regardless of who you love, we're equal. Regardless of whether you're comfortable in the body that you were born with, you are equal. Regardless of your choices in life, we're equal. Okay? That's kind of the underlying tone of that whole thing. Now, there's a couple ways that you can go at this. One is this is the more confrontational way, and probably not advisable unless you're in a meeting of philosophers or something like that. Without God, if you really want to push people to the logical end of what they say they believe, say that they believe there is no God, but we need to treat everybody equally and with respect. If you don't have a God, why bother? If it is as science tells us it is, that we've all evolved and gotten here, and it's all been survival of the fittest to get us to this point, why should I care about you? Because if science alone is the thing that's giving us our reason for being, then we have no more natural rights than spiders, hyenas, chimpanzees. We're all here for ourselves, and we should not give a whit about anybody else if you want to push this to to its logical conclusion. And there are people who do this. There are a number of philosophers who write very strong arguments from that scientific perspective that say that human rights, according to science, is purely an invention of our minds. It's purely something that we've made up to act a little bit better than the spiders, the hyenas, and the chimpanzees, and that's it. And as I say, they write very cogently on this, and McLaughlin includes a couple of their quotes. And I mean, logically, what they say is infallible. If you believe the premise that we're all here because we evolved and we got here, then all bets are off, survival of the fittest. Okay, Arnold, you haven't had a chance to talk yet, and I saw Kier's hand as well, so yeah.
Well, just to take this to the extreme, and we deal with this fairly regularly in the animal rights community, it's that we are no different, the animals, so we have equivalent rights with them, and therefore, to be meat processing business is wrong. So it's not that we don't have rights, in fact, we just have the same rights. And so
Yes, exactly. Yeah. What we've done to make ourselves feel a little better is we've elevated everybody else to the same level as we are, or every other living creature. So yes, you kill a pig, you're killing. It's like murdering often the neighbor. Except you can't make bacon out of the neighbor, or at least you're not supposed to. Anyway, but and this is where it just throws a lot. The pendulum swings right through to the other end as well. Yeah, I laugh about this a little bit whenever I go to the vet. I don't know, we have some veterinarians in the congregation, and I don't want to offend them. But we've gone so far in veterinary science these days that taking your dog to the vet is quite the experience. I remember when our first dogs and my folks' dogs, you go to the vet and the vet would kind of go, well, I think it's this. We'll try this. And if it doesn't work, we'll try something else. Well, now when you go, this dog is as sacred as I am, so we have the whole array of tests we need to do on the dog. And that will be, $1,000, please. Or higher, yeah, and you're like, hold on, this is the dog. I love the dog. I really do. I love my dogs. I love my dogs too much. But I'm real sorry. It's a dog at the end of the day. Anyway, I might get some flack from family who are watching over that. But anyway, I have thumbs. They don't. Anyway, Kier, quickly. Yes, absolutely, yeah.
It's just, you just made up a story.
Yeah.
Like if this was the way it happened, then you just made it up. So
Yeah.
it's not believable
No.
either.
That's right. Yeah, both are open to a fair amount of discussion. Anyway, we are really out of time. People are starting to come in for church. Let's close with prayer. We'll pick it up here next time and get into what it is that we can say and do that is actually, hopefully, helpful in this whole regard. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, you see that we are set among many dangers and under huge pressures to conform to the ways of the world around us. But this is no different than any other time in the history of your people. The world has always pressured your people to think in its ways. We pray you'd give us strength to lovingly confront the world in which we live with the truth of the law and the gospel, and to proclaim the faith that you have given to us. Bless us now in whatever else we're doing this day, our worship and our comings and our goings, that would all be to your glory in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, everybody, thanks. And if we could get somebody to bring the table from halfway back up to the front here, and we're a little tight on time. So